And how quick was that?
That was swift.
Yeah. Nice and painless.
Nice. Awesome, man.
Brilliant. Good to see you, sir.
Good to see you. A bit of rosy Lee to get started.
Decaf in this particular case. Let me turn that going down. That's yeah. I need calming down because I had a really productive afternoon undone by technical gremlins. I was doing this jingle for another podcast I create, and I was really getting into it. I was like, yes, I'm so close. And I was sort of going, right, okay, right. And I got to the point where I was like, I was happy with a big chunk of it. Took about 2 hours. And I went to save. And as I went to press save, it crashed. And I've lost everything. So, yeah, that's quite a version of the noise I made.
Yeah, I'm because I've had that happen to me. There's definitely strong empathy right there. I've literally had that with stuff I've written. I've gotten like a really big, because when you get into a project like with me writing, I get into it and I can go through paragraphs and paragraphs and I'm doing really well, and then I walk away from it or I do something else and I come back, and there's been times where I've come back and it's literally it's dropped off the face of the earth, or the battery in my laptop has gone out and I didn't save it.
Oh, you forgot to plug it in.
no auto save, and I was like,
yeah. Tear
the ceiling down.
Oh, absolutely. I thought, like I said, I'll have it done by tomorrow, and it was actually like, okay, I've kind of got the feeling because it's using a new software, so I'm still getting my head around using the software, so that's a whole new thing. And I was like, oh, this sounds okay, this sounds good, and I was really close to doing it, and it just went back to it and just, and then the spinning blue wheel of death, and then just, yeah. So not overtly happy about that, I must say.
Yeah. Technology's great until it isn't.
Until it is, yeah. Technology's great when it's working, and then the times that it decides to not work. I mean, it's obviously, I know it's not a life or death thing, but it was really good, and I don't know whether I can capture that again. And I mean, I'm just going to go, well, at least now that I know how it's going to sound and what the notes are, I can make it sound better. But apart from that,
you're going to have to kind of parody your own work a little bit.
I literally will have to I will have to parody my own composition. I got the words. I just say, here's the words. Write music around this, and it's got to last, this short amount of time. And I thought, okay, first time actually recording music in it as opposed to dialogue. And just the spinning blue circle of death, and then has to shut down. And then I'm just frantically looking in the files, like, has it saved? Has it saved? And no, it had not saved. So, but that's
it's like in Jurassic Park where Samuel Jackson's dealing with that virus hack thing, and it's
the code,
it's going like, you've got to say the magic word, and you're like, please. Please.
Oh, damn it! You didn't say the old Wayne Knight's wagging finger.
Didn't say the magic word. Just grab the thing and frisbee it out the window, just like going. I'm not begging you.
If there was a gif of gathering up all the computers and just flinging it out the nearest window. It's like I was literally as my fingers traveling towards the save, I'll go to the mouse and get the little drop down there. No.
Just a Ron Swanson situation where he's got the computer monitor and just goes.
That's the gif I was looking for. If I'd posted it, I was like, just fling it in the bin and just walk away. Just throwing your phone on the floor just to make things worse. But
we should just go back to doing it all very binary. Never mind computers, never mind all that. Let's just do it with
zeros and ones. Yeah, just do it with instruments and ones. Well, yeah, I mean, I was doing it with an instrument. I was recording into the computer with an instrument. And, it's like I wasn't even using any onboard software. It's all just using the computer to record. It's my own finger drumming. It's my own bass playing and piano playing and fake saxophones and stuff, and it's gone.
It's so gone.
Gutted, absolutely gutted. 2 hours I've had the house to myself, hours of getting stuff ready, doing stuff, being creative, being productive, cleaning up and tidying this and going, right, now I've done that, I'll get down to the jingle writing. And and then that happens. So yeah, pretty annoying. One plus thing that did happen this week, which was the very last minute I saw it, there was a re-release of The Empire Strikes Back in the Everyman in Horsham. I think was on Wednesday night, possibly. I can't remember which night we went to go see it. But I literally just seconds, but I couldn't get through to my brother. I thought would really like it. Eventually he arrived. We jumped in the car, sped off down to Horsham, and found the Everyman, which I've not been to before. It's a really plush cinema, and it's a chain. So if you have an Everyman cinema near you and you feel you can go in there safely, of which they did, you know, they were on the safety thing. There was only about, I think, maybe 6, 7 other people in there, apart from me and my brother, and it's all silver table service. So you ask for your snacks and your drinks at the counter, and they bring it to you. They bring you literally a silver platter with like a thing of popcorn on and like a glass bottle Coke and a big, nice molded glass with ice, you know, like sort of ice cubes in it. It was lovely. And yeah, just seeing it in the big screen as well, because it's one of those things that I've only ever seen in the small screen. And not only that, in the 90s when we had the special edition videos, my dad, I remember I sent him away to buy them, and for some reason, do you remember what, I don't know, you might be almost too young to remember, do you remember you used to get like widescreen only versions of films?
Oh yeah, I remember that.
Do you remember? Yeah, he bought the widescreen only version, and the difference was, I said, so on an old CRT telly, you know, it's like a tiny little letterbox about that big. So yeah, just squinting at it, like the Family Guy, what is it, the Family Guy thing about the original uncut master version of Lawrence of Arabia, and it's just like a centimetre's width across the whole screen of the desert vista. I was like, I think that's Darth Vader. I can't tell. Like, and that's my glasses on. Yeah. It's the what is it, the Ken Jeong meme of like holding up the paper, like, whoa. But it was brilliant seeing it on the full screen surround sound, you know, and it gives it like a different perspective. Like I've seen Jaws, they did Jaws 4K and 3D, and that was amazing, as well as Terminator 2 about 3 years ago, which I also went to go and see by myself, I think, and I really thoroughly enjoyed it, and that was brilliant.
I think it's kind of like some films, some films, I think particularly Star Wars, as a matter of fact, is a film to be made as a spectacle, and you see it in that environment like a cinema, and it comes across more fully. Don't get me wrong, like I saw more recently The Force Awakens when it came out. In fact, I saw it twice because for reasons of skepticism.
Did you think maybe you give it the second doubt, or did you think maybe I'll hate it more the next time?
Yeah, it was kind of like I saw it the first time because it's Star Wars and it's so flashy, like especially this one. Like the special effects, I'm not going to malign it for, because Force Awakens is very, very good, but it was just everything else that I
get where you're coming. I didn't loathe it. I didn't hate it, like, because I think that there is a pressure to make a certain kind of film now in Hollywood, and if you look at how simplistic the original Star Wars are, it's very much a absolute bare bones good versus
it's very
evil.
Straightforward.
It is very straightforward. As you said, I want to make a kind of a Western in space, basically, and that's what it was. But also, it was breaking the mold of what you could do with special effects and with visual effects. You know, they were inventing new processes to go along to the point where, you know, you make your own Lucasfilm and Industrial Light and Magic come off the back of a film, because then people want to copy them. So yeah, it was great, and I definitely, if the Return of the Jedi comes out, I definitely would like to go and see that as well.
And I might well tag along if you.
Indeed, yeah. If it is coming out, I will give you the heads up, and if it's coming out at the Everyman, we'll go there and get luxury silver service. Drinks on a plate and lovely like that. Yeah, there was literally one family.
high class cinema viewing.
Kicks Cinema's world, you know, it kicks the Odeon's ass by a country mile, you know, price-wise and service-wise.
Here's your popcorn, shut up.
Shut up, getting those seats that may or may not have been, like, cleaned since the last person, like, you know, deposited his sticky form on them. Disgusting. Which, talking of this sort of generation thing, would lead us conveniently onto what we wanted to talk. Seamless segue.
Segue.
Yeah, seamless segue into what we wanted to talk about today, which I'll hand over to you.
Yeah, as we touched on last podcast, we're going to talk about it's a sort of like a discussion that was more sort of like an early sort of like 2010s kind of thing. It was a very big thing back then, but it's still pertinent nowadays. Is sort of like the antagonism and the sort of like conflict in perspectives between the baby boomer generation that were born out of post-war.
45 to 64, I looked at. So
yeah, and then the millennial generation, which is as far as I read, was from 84 onwards to now.
Yeah.
So,
Gen X is the bit in the middle. So
yeah, maybe Gen X has got a little bit to play, but damn it, we chose the person
we chose something. We got to stick with it. So, and also that's us as well. That's like you and me. So that's where that comes in. So yeah, I mean, I think a thing I saw, which I really wish I'd saved, and this was not that long ago. This was maybe 3 months ago, which was the idea that the way that the baby boomer generation views the millennial generation is because of a change in circumstance for us and a non-fluctuating set of circumstances for them in terms of when they came into the workplace, when they came into home ownership, when they came into, say, like technological revolutions, home technological revolutions, communication revolutions. It was like a sort of linear kind of, just like ever increasing thing where things just basically got better and better. So they said that because they came from a generation where they were just told and expected that everything, it's just only going to get better over time.
It's on the up and up. Yeah.
It's always going to be on the up and up. So therefore, if anybody of a lower age is complaining, they must be either lazy or feckless or they're stupid because they don't understand.
All they would get told is just, you're just overthinking it. Just wait, your time will come, that kind of thing.
Yeah, which I still get to this day. And I'd be like, I've lived literally through 2 recessions in just a smidge over a decade, like massive major ones. And as we mentioned, very much the tail end of the last one. Yeah. I'm not saying some people, it's not absolute. It's not every person. Some people are just lucky. I think there's a lot of people who say, look, I'm lucky because I just happened to walk into the right job at the right time, maybe just before it all got crap, or but I think there should also be an admittance of the fact that generation did have a large amount of luck on its side just because of how the world was, rather than like the odds were more in their favor in general than they are in a few people's favor now.
There's a lot of volatility nowadays, I feel like, in terms of like, I mean, more broadly, we'll probably start broadly and then get more into details as I'm kind of off to do with my tangents. But generally, touching on your point of there being a constant sort of advancement and betterment, technologically, most definitely, and economics, certainly, like from that period of post-war where all that, even in terms of the United States, that economic power that effectively came, but they basically turned all the military production to consumer production and to civilian.
Overnight, almost.
Effectively overnight, as like war's over, now there's all these factories that can repurpose themselves to making products, making cars, making televisions and all that stuff. And what happened from that, which is to go a bit more sort of procedurally as time went on, these jobs were basically generating a expansion of what became known as like the middle class, effectively that transitive socioeconomic
purchased. That's who not only they worked in, the working class produced it, earned a reasonable wage for it, the middle class consumed it,
and the disposable income. They had the ability to basically
fresh housing everywhere.
Yeah, basically massive infrastructure investment as well after the war.
In Britain, it would be the development of the council housing, which was, for people who mock a council house now, they might mock it for the fact that it was, they were prefabs, as the word is. They were not meant to last more than 20 years. They were meant to be starter homes. Then once the first generation moved out, they would be knocked down and something new would be built. And yet pretty much most of them are still standing now. There's
a lot around where I live that are pretty much late 60s into the 70s. That are still standing.
I mean, my house is from 1922, I think. That's where I think mine's dated from. And funnily enough, there is a chap who lived in the village. He lived in that when he first got married. I think he died just a smidge under 100 in 2013. So if that gives you an idea of how old he was, I think he was like 18, 19 when he bought it. So he might have been not the first owner, but the second owner. And there is a black and white picture of him with his wife and his baby in the front of it in the 30s. It's really weird because it's the front of the house. There's no garage there. It's just the house on the mound. And funnily enough, it was his son that my parents bought the house from in the late 80s. So, but that was a house built in a relative slight economic peak, not a massive one, but before that. But yeah, with that, the idea that people came into technological things like radios, and then that goes on to TVs, and then that goes on to microwaves, fridges. It's all the stuff that now is just kind of, it's consumer goods, and there's umpteen people who make it, and you can buy one of those consumer goods for not a lot of money, which also I think you can tie into the other thing about a certain generation is what they look at in terms of what's a flash fancy good. It's often the thing used against people who are on benefits, the old red top scrounger. They've all got a flat screen telly. It's like, have you been able to buy a round screen TV anytime in the past 15 years out of choice? It's kind of like you can literally pick one up on Gumtree. People will give it away for a tenner because it's only full HD, but it's not smart. So therefore it's worthless to them.
Arguably the ubiquity of that easy access to consumer goods, especially for people that are on benefits. I mean, I'm not so much on the bandwagon of like shaking my fist at people that are on benefits buying themselves odds and ends now and again, like,
because it's you need a bit of
it's like this is the thing, it's like, don't get me wrong, it's like in an ideal world we wouldn't need the benefits, of course, but if you can't really be expected to just live like effectively a employee, like some sort of employee of the state that doesn't have any joy in their life.
Yeah, exactly. What's so hard about it? Why, do they have to live in like a room that's not wallpapered, not carpeted, no TV, and just staring at the wall because they happen to be, and let's face it, a lot of them are disabled. They're not people who are just work shy. They physically have some ailment that stops them from working. And, if you literally had something that meant you were so sick you couldn't work, I wouldn't begrudge it. Having known someone very closely who's lived or tried to, basically, get help from the state because they've been so sick they can't work. I know that it's a massive uphill battle, and it's like they will find any loophole to stop you from getting what you actually do. You can be owed a fair amount if you deserve it, but they will stop you from having it. So these consumer goods are not expensive relatively, but it's using that's a media trick, I think, that's used on a generation where they would have been a massive purchase for somebody back then. But at the same time, that generation, do you see what I mean? Like, so like a television would be like, can we afford this? A basic television in the 50s might have been like a literal, you might have needed a guarantor to do it, even if it was, not even the best model.
Very high-end product. Like in terms of cars especially, like cars were effectively of the 20th century a real status symbol, a real investment of capital.
Regardless of when, if you bought a brand new, let's say if you bought the new 2020 Dacia, which is the cheapest car you can buy, I'm not going to assume that you're actually middle class or doing well. I could assume that you literally might have no money whatsoever, but you can have credit, and you can be massively in debt, but you can have credit and get something that's,
Credit is probably one of the biggest innovation. Well, I mean, I'm going to say it's one of the biggest innovations of that period, and I think that might be a sort of arguably something that is a linchpin of the contrast between the baby boomer generation and
wealth versus credit.
Well, with a lot of boomers. I mean, I want to get back to the premise.
Bear in mind, if you are a boomer, if you are watching this and you were born between 1945 and 1964, and you've got a hard luck story, to just put it in the comments or what have you, because we don't want to generalize we don't want to be generalized, but we're just saying from what most people tell us, it's
kind of like we're doing a little bit of an analysis sort of thing.
And a general analysis. We're not speaking about anyone in particular, but I am also going on the people that I know of that age who they don't have what they call like horror sob stories of purchasing houses or purchasing cars or just not, they say, yes, I got paid a small wage. And then you go like, yeah, but take in mind what inflation does to that small wage also versus what that wage was worth then. Because I did the calculations. You asked me to make notes, so I've gone and done. So,
there's some maths going on.
Oh yeah, there's some math. Yeah, exactly. Yeah. So if you were
rather you than me, my skill is languages.
Okay, right.
Language mostly.
No worries. The Thesaurus Rex has his purposes, so as your code name would be. But essentially, I did the equivalent of the minimum wage in 1965 would have been about £1 an hour. Now, what that could have bought you today is about £19.40 worth of stuff. So do you see? And now, obviously, if you look at, and I can't get the graph in front of me, but if you were
not
to
quite
go,
that advanced in the podcast.
No, I haven't.
Superimposing.
I haven't got the. There's no Jamie to like throw a thing on the third input. Jamie, blow that up. So I don't have a guy like operating the third input source, so I can suddenly have a graph turn up in the middle. Yet, yes, I could still easily buy a TriCaster, a second-hand one, as long as it just put little graphs. I just use it for graphs, and it's that. You know, that minimum wage, if we talk about how much the minimum wage has not increased versus how much every other cost has increased. And my current wage, I'm not on the minimum wage, my current wage is bounced off of what the minimum wage is. So if the minimum wage goes up, my wage goes up. But considering how low that is, there's the current, what you might call younger people and some older people, maybe Gen Xers or boomers who are still working in a certain market, will find that the argument is always that anybody who's anything over minimum wage, the people below them on minimum wage don't deserve to have any more because the people slightly higher up are only earning X. And because the people below them are earning Y, but it's more the case of, but your X should be at this stage, if things had gone in, you know, as they were meant to, way over there, you know, way over there, or it should at least buy more.
So in terms of like the financial influence that of basically the market and the inflation has effectively sort of hard bracketed their earning potential.
Yes. It's kind of closeted it in this, you know, it's literally, we're talking, what, a decade, and it's maybe a couple of quid either side, you know. It's like it's gone that sort of thing.
Low in terms of like an advancement in as you would expect. I mean, neither of us are economists or financial analysts, but still we have the sense that in terms of like the kind of economy that we live in, a first world economy, and then in terms of like the sheer diversity of jobs and potential for earning, we're kind of very caught on this boxed in on this lower end. I mean, maybe that's done for reasons of resource management or economic reasons that are not privy to people on our level. But it's
when things come in, like you go into a job and they say it is above minimum wage, and then they mention how much, and it's like a couple of quid, but they want to call you a professional. You know, I thought I've you know, after having left a career, well, not left, made redundant from a career job, but made redundant from a career job, which was just starting to be paid up to the point where I was actually going to be just on the UK average, which last year, this is all the figures I could get for it, was about 27,500. That's the UK average earning salary, and I was just going to be a smidgen above that. And unfortunately, I got made redundant in the 2 weeks that it took to process that. So the only thing I saw of that was a redundancy package that took that into account. So that technically would have put me into that, but that was being put in this professionals bracket, which I sort of think, if I'm only just there in a professionals bracket, how on earth does anyone underneath me who has to pay for rent or, you know, have a family, how do they do it? I do not know how they do it, apart from credit. Back to credit, because it's just offered freely. It's easier to just offer people a load of credit and make that's, you know, most.
I think it's either credit or subsidy, I think, is the main thing that we need to look at. Like, we're living on borrowed credit or we're living on government subsidy. There's not really that middle ground there used to be, where there was organic and free floating profit, effectively, from the individual working. There used to be
in the pocket.
Yeah, there used to be a trifecta, where that additional money was beyond the taxation, and the taxation supported the subsidy and limited. And
therefore, if somebody was in total dire straits, the money going into the pot for taxation, there was enough in there to help the person who, by no fault of their own, couldn't essentially couldn't get into the employment market, had a disability or just an impediment that meant that they couldn't get a job, or they were just unable to leave an area of low, you know, economic movement. And but now it's almost like the argument against ever raising any wage whatsoever. I go, well, and here's all right, more figures, more facts and figures, because I've really gone for broke on this because I don't want to be wrong. So in 1979, the average CEO to worker pay ratio was 30 times. That's 19. So that's 41, because this was a 2019 study. So what you're now left with is it's about 287 to 1. And it actually, about 3 years ago, it sometimes peaked an average of 306. But it's gone down, but still that's 287 to 1. And we never hear that. Maybe, it sounds, you could disagree with me at this point, but you could say, is there a point where we say there is so much higher, higher echelon compensation, but people on the working strata are caught between either having to live, as you said, living off credit because they've got no actual money, or being so poor they have to work, but they also are paid so little they actually have to go to the government for a top-up. So it's like, well, what's the argument? Is the argument that you can't raise the wage, but if you raise the wage, there's less government interference needed? So where's the no-brainer in that? If you see what I mean.
Let me dig into that, because that's quite interesting. I'm preeminently someone that believes in a freer market than one that's too regulated. First off, I believe that if a business does well, then absolutely it should be able to profit off of its own success. But we're in this situation, and I think this is more sympathetic to the scenario that we have. Obviously, that take an Amazon for instance. It's a business model and a structure of business that is probably not. It's unlike anything that's ever been raised in terms of economy ever.
And liquidity.
Because obviously, we're effectively in a situation where we
started as a bookshop.
Yeah, and it's an online warehouse effectively, working off of the consolidation of other consumer goods under its umbrella, and it's a logistics company effectively, delivery, bringing that product to you. But my standpoint is, which is more sympathetic, is just to clarify, it's kind of like when one of the inconsistent perspectives that people have that might not be aware is in terms of what they actually have as liquid assets, and what is actually money that is like net worth compared to liquid assets. They
are two different things.
Yeah, and I mean, this was kind of the thing I took kind of chagrin with Bernie Sanders' economics when he was raising them, because he seemed to be either unknowingly, or which I'd say wouldn't be the case, but or willfully not taking into account that there's a difference between those two things. What I would say is that, especially in a company like Amazon, if there's a profit margin that is so excessive and so disproportionate to the actual form of the company,
and the health of its workforce, could you say?
Yeah, that's the thing. It's like it's the difficulty of, like, because this is, like I said, it's a very strange concept of a business. It's very different, and it's very in relative terms new. But in terms of like supporting the workers in that place, I mean, there have been there's some horror stories in how they are so heavily pressured, and so very, like, guys needing to be in soft drink bottles on the actual line when they're like organizing deliveries and stuff like that. And the demand,
it's a tightly run ship to almost absurd extent.
The demand is extraordinary, beyond extraordinary. Like, don't get me wrong, like Amazon, there's a reason why they're on top. It's like, in terms of like anyone's experience, they can order a product and they say it comes in a certain time, and sometimes it can come even
earlier.
Before, and it makes you wonder. Yeah, it makes you wonder, how in the hell is, like, what is the ethics and the mentality of the process on the ground in the business?
friend of mine said that we could actually, he had it was literally just an off-the-cuff thing. He said if we weren't such an impatient race of people, we could have a better society and a better economy if we didn't need to have things right this very second. And I think that we're sort of perpetuating, if you go and work a crappy job, and in some ways it's a self-perpetuating thing, because if you've got a crappy job that doesn't reward you financially, doesn't reward you in your soul, doesn't reward you in terms of your scope of what you want to do in life, and you get home after a week that's just absolutely kicked you in the arse, and you've got a little bit of, it's payday and you got a little bit, and you go, right, I'll buy that computer game from Amazon, but I hate life so much, I don't want to spend a minute not having it, so I want it first thing tomorrow morning. Again, leading to that whole
distraction. That distraction from the situation.
So then I need a distraction. So then that order gets put through. There's some guy running around like a blue ass fly in a warehouse who's got to get it, and it's got to be on the truck by that point. And that truck's then got to be driven at breakneck speed to you to get it to you. You get it. You have your short little release of endorphins playing it, and I'm bored of that. Next payday, I'll do the whole thing all over again. Whereas here's a thing that I don't mind. I'm not, unless it's for somebody's birthday or something, I'm not fussed about getting anything at any speed. And I almost think if we could all have that mentality of, let's not live in this lastminute.com world of everything I need now because I'm so insatiated for pleasure and release of good feelings, and just go, right, I can order it. It's not going to be here now, but in 3 days' time, if I've actually got some patience, which would mean that they haven't had to run somebody, into the ground physically to get it done. They haven't had to kick loads of CO2 into the atmosphere by having a guy drive at breakneck speed, because being a driver as well, I know that when you're working for certain package companies, you are encouraged to safely break the speed limit, if that makes sense, which is like be on the edge of it at all times because you have so many packages to deliver, but just don't get caught,
I think that's definitely, not to cut you off, but I think that is definitely a factor. And I think it orbits the entire sort of premise of consumerism. I mean, don't get me wrong, I think we're quite far off of the initial premise of what we were going to discuss, but let's get back to it in a second. Yeah. Consumerism and the very sort of like we mentioned it in the previous podcast about the mentality of always there being in an ever-present where they need something now. There's no consideration of future or past context or occurrences. It's just now. There's no sort of like forethought or hindsight even with a lot of people. And that hypothetical person that works a low rent job buying that video game, they might not want to recollect the fact that they bought this video game, got bored of it quite quickly, and then they're doing exactly the same thing now. But in the future, they don't really see there's any change in course. So
why change your behavior?
Exactly.
Why change your behavior? Because you're not. There's no I think that let's put it this way: the level of optimism I've seen is mostly from people who are heiresses or inheritees. They're the only people I know in any circle who have what one might call any kind of think of the future is going to be brilliant. For me, especially, I would say that unless. I think most people go, the future might be bearable. Most people I know said the future might be tolerable, but even that gets ground down and down and down. And on that satisfaction thing, I've literally just had a brainwave while we're sitting here, is the absence of what one might call basic, the inability to have enough liquidity per individual to get your basic levels of security, which is a job that you can't just basically be fired from tomorrow that isn't already paying you crap wages to begin with. A place to live where it's not, you can't suddenly be made homeless because of the whim of a landlord in a month. And so without those securities, we go, well, I'm never going to have that. I'm never going to have that house. I'm never even going to be able to afford to live in a thing that's basically an unsafe building, even if I saved for 5 years and didn't stop to eat or drink, and I put every single piece of money I had into a savings account. I just won't ever be able to have that unless somebody dies, leaves me some money, or I just win the lottery tomorrow. And they go, well, all these basic things, a car, I can't even put a big deposit down on a basic car, so I've got to buy secondhand. So I know I'm looking down the barrel of that thing breaking down on me because it's all I could afford. And, I know about what I call, it's a circle of vehicular poverty. You don't drive, do you? Do you drive?
I don't drive, but I get the sense of what you're driving at.
Yeah. So if like it's the whole premise of like, you know, working in poverty is that people say, oh, well, why do you have a car? I go, because I need it to get to work. And sometimes I can't just be entirely reliant on public transport. And then if you do get the car, they say, oh, why didn't you get a new one? That one's broken down. I said, because the first car I bought was already old. It already broke down multiple times, which then meant I couldn't sell it. I had to get rid of it. Everything I put into it was basically a loss, which means that I have to then start buying my second car. I had a van that basically cost me 3 times as much in a year to fix it than it did to buy it, because the previous van that I spent a lot of money on was a wreck, dressed, you know, it was basically a wreck dressed up in golden clothing. So you end up just going down and down and down that spiral, because you have no choice, because you can't just go, oh, well, all of a sudden I've got $5,000 in my pocket to buy a decent 2-year-old, low end car. You don't. All you can just do is keep funneling money into the thing you have until eventually
that's sunk cost fallacy, isn't it?
Yeah, the sunken cost fallacy. That's exactly what it is, because it's like, you know, and everybody I know who basically, you know, it's just, oh, well, I've never had that problem. It's like, yeah, because your parents bought you your first car and it was new and it was yours, and all you've had to do, you've sold it for a profit. You've got the profit to then put the money down on a new car, and you just keep repeating the cycle over and over again, whether it's HP, whether it's, whether it's a finance deal, whether it's a bank loan, and that's fine. If you're already on the downer after your first car, but you still need one, you're automatically always running at a loss. And it's the thing with, and, you know, in terms of cars, you know, there's probably more secondhand cars that you can buy now, and they probably are far more reliable in terms of a secondhand one than maybe you would have got back then. But also, you can't fix them like, if my dad was buying a car in the 70s, which he used to a lot, chances I could fix it with a hammer and a screwdriver.
Yeah. Keying it back around to, let's bring it back onto the contrast of boomer and millennials. Definitely the situation, I mean, touching upon what you've said, social mobility and the socioeconomic situation for us, there's no social mobility for us, really. Because
we sort of know what the best to hope for is, you know.
Yeah, social mobility has been replaced with credit, effectively.
Yeah, that's rather horrible that it has to be summarized like that. But that's true. Social mobility and advancement has just been replaced with how much more money the bank will lend you.
Yeah, instead of earning yourself and actually having that sort of like unbiased, unowned money by anyone else but you, having that free-floating liquidity on your own and being able to invest that back into the economy, or investing it into home, car, or whatever other products that you may want. It's... Because when I talked about that trifecta earlier, in terms of like that personal profit, the subsidy, and the credit, if you haven't got that upper strata of that trifecta,
you never get the top one.
Yeah, it's not there. So basically, you've got the bare minimum of what you're earning, which is not enough to go beyond what your costs are, what the taxation is, what you need to invest in, unforeseen circumstances, and all that. So basically, you either have to rely on credit or subsidy, and both of those situations have been disproportionately blown out because so many people are relying on them either by necessity or by sheer apathy and not really knowing or caring. And
there's certainly a case to be made on what you're saying, that this should be taught in school. You know, I wish there'd been some sense of like, you know, even if it sounded like it was very condescending, like a basic, like, here's your earnings, here's what you're likely to have to spend out on when you're an adult, here's what you can put away, here's what credit is, here's why it may be a good idea for this, here's why it may be a terrible idea to utilize towards that, and that's it. But then again, also, they may be teaching, if that was taught, it may have been taught by somebody of a generation who just thought that, you know, by the time you've paid your rent, you've not even touched a quarter of your salary. And you go, no, it's 3/4. Yeah.
I would say, it's somewhat channeling my sort of like pseudo boomer in the check and white top.
You're a working man. You're a working man thing going on there.
I earned all I got.
I know. I ain't got much.
I ain't got much push, man. As much as I say that, it's it's. I wish I had that.
I wish you had a spittoon.
Well, spittoon and earning everything on my own and not relying on anything else. That's the kind of thing I'm leaning at. But in terms of the education piece, it's very untrendy to say it, but there's 3 topics that I would like brought back and made mandatory if I was going to be authoritarian about it. Like, literally, you need to learn this shit.
In John's Britain, basically, you would have the following 3.
In my hypothetical Britain, where everyone is doing as I fucking tell them,
or else,
or I'll just
why
make a
I order?
I'll make a long Facebook status and berate you over the internet.
That's not like you at all.
No, that's not true. And again, I'd have the means to like do a massive broadcast across the country. Just
and no one would be able to ignore it. It's just on every channel.
You dumbasses! I told you. No, we're gonna try. 3 topics that I'd bring back. I'd bring back firstly economics to be in economics, as in the topic of that, basically personal, and that would have like substratas of like personal economics, financing, taxation, understanding tax systems and stuff like that. How to budget, that kind of thing. And the other 2 I would bring back sort of more as in terms of my perspective would be, and it's very old fashioned, and it's kind of why I said I'll venture to channel the boomer, is civics and philosophy, and basically having, and I wouldn't put philosophy under the current umbrella of sociology, because I feel sociology is kind of a sort of new age kind of thing.
I must admit, I've not heard of it being. So I remember, like, I think they might have been options, like economic. I can't really recall, but I've heard of other people having them as options. I don't recall them in my school, which would have been the same sixth form as you.
Yeah,
I don't remember them being options.
I didn't go to sixth form.
Oh, right, fair enough. Well, I don't remember them being like. I remember them, other people in other forms having options, but then of course I didn't even pay that much attention to it because I didn't know what they were. So
the thing is, like, that may be a valid point as well. In the period where you need them, your focus is as a student of the age that you were. Like, I don't know, you put your late teens pushing into your 20s. Your focus isn't there. Your focus isn't there.
Your focus is on having a good time. So
especially nowadays. I mean, that keys back into the entire modern culture. But
living for today, because tomorrow's shit.
Yeah, the free.
In the long term, tomorrow's pretty shit. So live for today.
But then again, it's like sort of running contrary to that. I've kind of got sort of like a sort of mentality of sort of like, I mean, having done a lot of like philosophical thought within myself. Sorry, I've got people talking.
No, that's all right. Carry on. You're louder than them once you speak.
Basically, I've got 3 values in my life as I've sort of had meditation to think about it, and philosophy is one of them. And basically, having that sense of self that, despite circumstance and despite the surroundings, especially for myself, in sort of like an individual sense, there needs to be a certain like heroism aspect. And I know it sounds a bit poncy, but follow me on it. If you are the sort of person that values your own well-being, then you have to kind of take challenges and adversarial circumstances as challenges, and basically, and even if you're not winning, even if you're not overcoming them as you think you should, you still have to have the mentality is like, I'm going to get up and I'm going to fight. And that's what I've taken. Even in dark times of like, and this is an aspect where it was, again, with the boomer generation, they probably never encountered this, but this sort of lack of transcendental motive. What are we here for? What is our actual reason to be? And
maybe we've got not more time, but maybe we're so confronted with hitting a brick wall on things that a previous generation just did, because it not only were you expected to do it, it was almost easy just to fall arse backwards into doing it. So as you got people who might have gone from, say, for example, I got a friend who was made redundant on his birthday 4 years in a row. 1 year after ever. Yeah, exactly. And it just get to the point where you just go, I'm gonna,
with.
Yeah, exactly. Like, God is fucking, if there is a God, he hates my guts, because he's making me dread what should be a fun day. And, you know, in that point, and since then he's got very philosophical, because I think it's like, you know, redundancy, I think, is something that also our generation just expects, like, well, it's just, you know, things are rough, so I'm probably going to be made redundant, or, you know, it's not a case of, I don't know many people off the top of my head. Of course, everyone could be bullshitting and saying they're a fantastic employee, but they could also be, you know...
what's the CV worth nowadays? I mean, who actually tells the truth on their CV nowadays?
Yeah, well, not a lot, you know. Apart from me, maybe that's why I haven't got anywhere. So maybe my...
You know what? I'm actually an astrophysicist in my spare time. Wink.
You know, I'm sure you could use a marine biologist, you know, in this.
A debonair, world-traveling marine biologist.
Yeah.
By the way, here's 20 quid.
Are you familiar with my friend Queen Elizabeth? Get the hell out of the what? Oh, okay, right. So, but yeah. So that aspect of, as we've said, the things that, assuming that the baby boomer generation working on the context that if everything's meant to be getting better, why all these millennials moaning and whining and everything like that? So, and also, but another thing is very basic. It sounds like such a simple thing, but it's a home, houses, house prices, and as I go down to my notes further, and I'm going to pull that up. So, excuse me, squinting. So, from 1967, the average house price was something in the region of £6,000, £8,000. Now, the graph doesn't go up altogether that far. Can you still see me? I'm not sure whether I'm. Yeah,
I can still see you.
Excellent, good. No, that's fine. I don't know exactly how this works, but yeah, it's just assuming that if all of a sudden I bring up Google, it will suddenly cause me to disappear. But essentially, it only has dipped. House prices only dipped after the 2008 recession, where they went down to an average of 160,000, and have only gone up further since then. And the graph only goes to 2014, which crests under 200,000. And then there's also another one, which is the wages. So the average salary versus that. So the average salary of versus the average house price. So what we have here is a 1970 to 2020 graph. So the average salary it's gone up by sort of something like £6,000, about the same as the house prices, actually, about £6,000 to just a smidge. It's a big graph, because the thing is, the worst thing is that the graph needed to just compound how house prices has to be so massive that the line of people's earnings is so absolutely minuscule, so to fit on the same graph. So the average, that's not even just under £30,000, and the line stops a little bit before 2020. But the price of the average house goes up even further than the previous graph to £240,000. And also, between you and me and the gatepost, as two Surrey boys, we know for a fact that would buy you somebody's garage in this county? 220,000, maybe. Just
in terms of land price, which obviously affects house prices. Jesus, it's very, very, very limiting. I mean, I don't think I know anyone that's actually managed to get the ownership of their house yet. I mean, pay off their mortgage and stuff like that.
Well, I don't know one who's paid off their mortgage, but I know one or two people, and one person who knows who he is, but he actually has worked as a mortgage advisor for many years. So in terms of having the base knowledge to get himself on the housing ladder and do it early on, you know, it couldn't have been better for him. And he's obviously paying a lot of money for it, but he will own it in not too long. And the value of it has gone up probably, I would say, about 30% in the 5-6 years since he's had it. Whereas, and also, if you want to talk about the relative value of my house, I can't give you a guided tour, but essentially I can tell you that when my folks bought it in 1987, it was, and I think they bought the field later, and the field is now encompassing it, but I think that the total price of what they would have paid for it over 5 years, including the purchase of the field, without building really on it, apart from doing basic bits of maintenance here, was about 150, 160,000, which was not back then a lot of money, but it wasn't a cheap house either. It was bang in the middle for about 1987. So it was like, oh, that's quite plush and quite posh. Sorry, that's a virus thing there coming up there. It's not a virus, but it's just yeah, that's all right.
I can't see it, man. Don't worry.
Oh yeah. As long as you heard the little ba-da-dum, I just thought whether you could hear that or whether that was just me, whether I'm hallucinating. But now it's now been valued. At last value 2 years ago, it was 820, give or take.
God almighty, yeah.
So if you work out, and if it had only risen with inflation, because I used the inflation calculator as well. So I worked out what it was if it was, say, 100,000 for just the house, not including the field at the back, which is like 1.8 acres or something. The house sits on maybe like 1.5 acres. So if it had only gone up with inflation, it would technically you'd only be able to price it now at about 320, 330,000, which could probably get you a very, very, very small house somewhere in this borough county now with no garden, with a minute amount of ground space. And as someone who's also, so that's, without that's what, £500,000 just in value by existing, not in terms of the physical inflated price of the product. It's the value that it exists. Basically for the fact that it hasn't been blown down in a storm, it's got £500,000 extra worth of liquidity onto it without having added any more buildings, without having, like shed. I don't think it's suddenly jumped up there because we've got a couple more sheds in the garden.
Yeah, and it's kind of like, there's also the other side of it is like, that's not even taking into account the speculative sort of like the demand actually inflating that price even further. So
exactly. And I'm somebody, because I work in driving an agency, I pretty much 80% of my work is stuff that goes to building sites. And I can tell you for a fact that you often have no idea how many new housing developments there are. I go to places like Haywards Heath and Kent, and it's like everywhere you blink and there's a new development up there. So why, surely in a just world, prices of houses would be plummeting. They would be at the point where they're affordable, because it's not like, where I work in terms of, you go to Kent, they're building so many new houses around established areas of Kent as well. And they are sort of clustering them. There's a large village, borderline town called Cranley, which probably will end up being a town soon, that has had 5 new developments all around it. And it's just all like, it's done that to the town. It's not even like it's spaced it out or put it on any, and none of them are on brownfield site. Well, like one of them is on a brownfield site. And that's the other thing in terms of the brownfield site waste that just sits there because industry that no longer exists in this country just sits there unused, and it just stays there unused. And what do? They just build it on a floodplain next to a river on a greenfield site. What's the worst that could happen? And everywhere they want to develop is just like, how can there be this many new houses being built, and yet home ownership is just out of reach for so many people? And some of these houses are not even extravagant. They're like 2 up, 2 down terrace things. They just happen to be new.
I would say, I think it's based, a lot of it is just in terms of like, of having not actually made the investment as the population has risen for so long. They're now kind of playing catch up. So effectively what they're doing, no matter how many houses they're putting down now,
it's just not enough.
It's still behind the curve of the population growth. So,
but is it behind the curve of the population growth? Because you could be right, but I look in the sense of that
it may be a factor.
It probably is a factor, but I look at the fact that in terms of like what you might call people living in rented accommodation, if we're talking about like the homeowners to be, we are essentially probably talking about people from their late 20s to mid 30s. That in a traditional world would be the homeowners to be.
Yeah.
And they all have to be living somewhere right now as well. They are not all living out their cars or all living, with their parents as we do, because it's just phenomenally expensive. I mean, it's not like there's 30 people to a household on average because no one can move out. So if there is this much demand for housing, but it's not like, oh, we're building it, so therefore everyone will get one. But it's still, even with it's not the case, because even with an above average wage, if someone was to take a look at my salary, and this is a quote, I haven't got it with me, but I saw it got thrown around on social media probably about once every 6 months, and I always liked it, and it came up, and I should have saved it and put it in a link. But it's an article written to, I think it's like the Telegraph or the Times or something. It's in the back pages of writing letters to the editor or what have you, and it's about the generational gap. And it's somebody who says, when I was 20 in 1965, I was a fireman. I had a house in West London, which was a terraced house. It was valued at £6,000. My yearly salary was £3,000. And within about 4 or 5 years, we paid it off and we moved somewhere bigger. And so without anything being done to it, that house is now worth £600,000, and the average wage is not even 30 grand. So do you understand why the new generation of people on, you know, what we're being told are good high-end salaries are screwed? And I thought, you know what, I totally get that, because it was 200% of his income to buy that house. So he's not going to sell it. He's not going to pay it off in 1 year, because he's still got to eat. But he's not looking at down the barrel of a 60, you know, he's not looking down the barrel of being on his deathbed and still, you know, looking at mortgage payments in his 80s or 90s. He's looking at like, right, by the time I've maybe married and had like 1 kid, I can then afford to like go up the scale, go up the ladder, get something bigger, sell it, put something down on something bigger. And that just, I don't think, without a lot of help from the prior generation, parental wise, or just, you know, getting a ridiculously, because also, you know, I've heard what some people pay on their mortgages, and the payments compared to rent is so small. You know, like if I could pay rent on a mortgage basis, I could live in somewhere really nice tomorrow, easily. But it's terms of like rent is like,
I think it's kind of structured that way though, to keep you in that tenancy.
Yeah. So is that because now, so have we stumbled across some sort of new market thing of the 21st century, which is easier just to keep money coming out of people stuck in rent than possibly being able to move them into houses that they could quite well afford to pay off? I know that maybe not a question. Yeah, it's not a. It sounds like
if you could guarantee that income, then why would you not? I mean, if you're particularly thinking that you want to keep a constant flow of income coming in as a landlord, and I'm not going to say an absolute statement that all landlords are arsewives. I'm not going to say it, because
I know many that are really nice, and I know many, you know, I've known many that have literally caused.
It may more be that the system of that situation is something that is causing that situation for people, because it's a model of home occupancy at premium price that doesn't really leave any way out unless you just go, okay, I'm just going to go live in a field.
Yeah, exactly. My retirement plan. Funny enough, speaking of retirement plans, it's like knowing, and this is a lot of peer pressure on by various parents of people that I know. Mine is one of mine is that the insistence on, it's if you had the money, the first thing you should do is buy a second house, because then you can use that to pay the mortgage of your other one. In my mind, I'm going, isn't that kind of a false economy? And they go, no, because then you're left with 2 properties. I said, yes, but I still have to pay both of them off. So, you know, and they go, well, it's there for when you retire. And I go, but isn't that a sign rather that instead of you've been sold like a retirement plan that actually screws over the generation under you, because your retirement plans are so shaky that your state pension or your private pensions are so shaky, especially after I think a lot of people I know of a certain age after the crash of 2008 had so much money built up in private pensions that, like my dad's private pension was very big, gone, you know, so second properties just suddenly become like, well, you know, if I've got the money to buy it, then that becomes something that will still pay its way off. But in a knock-on effect, turning it into a rental, you know, like a mass market of renting rather than buying, you essentially trap the generation under you and then one under that in a situation where, because everything available is only a second-hand rented property, it's not a new house available to buy. And that's why, you know, I often have arguments, but I say, look, I really wish you'd stop getting angry that any houses are being built, because what it's coming across is that comes across to me as I'll be annoyed because I can't jack up my rent left, right, and center and charge a phenomenal amount for not very much return, because there are better options available. So what you're saying is that you would like to deny somebody a right that when you were younger in your 20s and coming up and getting into the jobs market, you would be aghast if you knew that was happening. You know, so why is it fine for us?
I think that's the fundamental of social mobility. One of the most stark and tangible things about social mobility is the ability to be mobile in where you live. and actually
to
being
up
able
sticks,
to move.
yeah, shouldn't be
To
an
move from one
utter
place
nightmare.
to another.
Hmm.
Yeah, if you want to move from one location to another, and that's effectively I think that must be the definition of social mobility.
I think it
being
is.
able to move from one location of a certain socioeconomic background to one that is perceived or is tangibly, in terms of resources, higher. Like it's got more school choice, it's got more leisure opportunities, it's got more potential for social interaction with people, and safety. Maybe. I mean, that was the entire premise of people moving into cities, wasn't it? Effectively, like that was the drive, basically bringing people.
And also
into
the suburban flights in the especially in America, as we mentioned, when all the the leather towns and things like that were built. The idea that everybody living on top of each other in a city would just be, they just realized that it's horrendous quality of life. So if you can move out to a pre-planned area and that's also people coming back, going into jobs that had only just existed, but they could go, like there's a brilliant program that I suggest everybody watch, which is I think it's called The Century America's Time, and it's available on YouTube. It was made towards the end of the 90s for the millennium, and it's like every program is like an hour 45 minutes long on like a segment of a decade, or like, this one's about the 1910s, this one's about the 20s, 30s, 40s, 50s, and so on. And the one from basically from about 1946 until about 1960, it just mentions that they had jobs in building houses. They could get a house built in a morning and then another house built in an afternoon, all to an exact pre-plan, and then those same people, once it was all done, could then literally go and live in those houses. They could move out of the city, live in these houses. Then they built around pre-existing small towns. Then they built the urban sprawl, and then people moved out of there. And it was only the people who were in the absolute of dire straits that still had to stay in the city, or people that had the kind of jobs that meant they had to basically more or less work, live where they worked.
Yeah, I think that was the premise of in the 1950s. I think it was the premise of Los Angeles becoming sort of like its golden age of growth and how and like effectively culturally, but also socioeconomically, that particular place kind of was a boom town
massively.
And there was a lot of infrastructure building, a lot of housing building, a lot of cultural.
There are cities there now like Burbank and things. They were not even on the map like in 1945 even. They just came along and existed, and they sprung up, or they were just literally little 4-street places and then just built around it because they could. It wasn't like they were impeding on any particular sort of valid land. It's something I know about. We've got some American friends, and they where they lived used to be a very middle class, sort of very humble place. And if you look at the place where they are, what it used to be, you see little like single story buildings where there used to be just average Joe houses, which are near Washington DC in the county of Maryland, near Bethesda. And if you go every other house is this giant now brand new McMansion, because they don't buy houses to live in them in America. They buy houses to raise them to the ground and build something on it. And then the next person moves in who's earning quite a good money. They don't even want that lovely brand new house. They'll knock down something that's 2 years old. They're not attached to it. And they'll build a brand new one straight on there, which will look completely different because it's the way they want it to be. And our friends have moved in, done it twice, and they've literally moved 2 streets over, and they've lived in 2 really nice houses. But if you look at what used to be there beforehand, it's almost like, not in any way to saying it's their fault. They've just taken advantage of circumstances that are there. But the people of a certain income strata have been pushed to where there almost isn't anywhere left to live that's affordable. And it's only literally, you have to the working class. There was something someone said the other day. It was a bit, built up for dramatic purposes, but it essentially said the working class are essentially the hungry. The middle class have now become the working class. The upper middle have become the middle class, and then the top 1% have become like stratospherically powerful. And it's just done this sort of weird thing where this bit's gotten bigger and bigger, but not necessarily of wealth. It's gotten bigger in terms of shared circumstance, and then that little bit at the top has just gone like that. And there are people who defend it. I think you might not defend it, but you would say you understand where, like, too much is too much.
I understand my main basis is that I appreciate like the capitalist endeavor of basically cornering a market and then building a service around.
And I don't have any problem with that
service
whatsoever. I've got no problem with that. That's fine. I don't almost have a problem with the capitalist system. I just think that when it's sort of left to...
There seems to be a sort of a sick perspective in it, or a sick aspect in it, has basically kind of lost touch with the roots of... Because I believe, this is the thing, I don't really want to get too heavily into the whole capitalism. And
we've got 5 more minutes.
Socialism.
Yeah, we've got 5 more minutes. So once again, we've hit.
And I had so many notes, and I wanted to touch upon them, but
we can always save them. We can always make it a 2-parter. We can always make it a 2-parter.
Yeah, and in fact, look forward to the 17-part
lecture series.
Lecture series. I find that capitalism, in the free market aspect, gives the most freedom for a person to actually taking all the other things out. If it was just straight your own efficacy as an individual, you have a skill set, or you are able to lead in a certain forum of business. If you build a business and generate an infrastructure industry, and then start generating that product or that service, and ultimately that, I think the term that's brought forward is high tide raises all ships. Which is,
a rising tide raises all boats.
Yeah. I think that was the right one. But that was generally where I come from. I'm more sort of for a sort of grounded perspective on what capitalism, sort of like mum and pop store sort of thing, brick and mortar kind of places, things based in a very... I'm sort of like a weird sort of like working class capitalist.
They do exist. I've heard
they do exist. I'm sort of like a what would you say? Is it white collar, blue collar? I can't even remember those.
The traitor. No, I didn't mean. Oh, sorry, I've got this terrible cold. Judas. Judas, traitor.
Oh, man, but
People's Front of Judea.
In terms of looking to make profit for the sake of bettering not only yourself and generating a better circumstance
those around
for yourself, but all those around you. And I think there's a certain extraction of wealth where there's a distance between the person that manifested the business, and they basically ended up in a sort of ivory high tower, which I can agree with the antagonism that comes from the left in terms of that, because they seem so detached from the actual material and
that made them that got them where they were in the first place. Essentially, what we would like to think of where they built up. Well, it's interesting you should say the detachment, because if I say, I know I'll say the words Noam Chomsky and you might, choke on your tea, but but he did point out, he said in the 50s and the 60s, when you had these, the heads of these companies that made, that were the backbone of the American economy in the 50s and the 60s, there were people like General Motors, Ford, Boeing, General Electric. They said everybody who was in the top used to work at the bottom. They started as a fitter, they started as an engineer, a T-boy, worked their way up to a manager, then eventually they become a CEO. So if you look at the top of most companies now that essentially are in the FTSE or what have you, they are just based in money. They're finance. They don't produce anything. It's just moving money from one place to the other, and the effort is all for the sake of the shareholders.
Between,
and they've all come from business schools. They've all come from what one might call management and CEO schools. So they have no connection to anything at the bottom. Basically, the thing that comes out of the factory that they should be selling or marketing, they've only got a connection to the money that's involved in what is being sold. So how do we make more of that money rather than how do we create a product that works well, that keeps our workers paid and that pays us? It's all about, right, well, how do we just benefit us lot in the management class up here? What do we sell? Paper towels? Oh, cars. Okay, right. So it's
How that about kind paper of towels in cars.
What about paper towels in cars? Brilliant. Is there a way you could do it that would actually? Is there a way that you could do it by firing a lot of people and sending it to China that would create more money?
I mean, there's so many angles that I've got so much that I could fire on right now. The main thing I was going to say there is like the transition from manufacturing to services economy, which was the main socio-economic change, and that's also keyed into the idea of globalization. which is obviously the outsourcing of manufacture to the lower economic strata countries for cheaper labor in doing those heavier task jobs. Because there's also the cultural aspect in these first world countries where they don't want to be in those manufacture jobs where it's like really hard and laborious work. So, and that's the thing. That was true near enough as soon as the Second World War ended. Basically, it was like we just finished fighting a catastrophic global spanning war.
Now I've got to go stand on an assembly line for 8 hours a day.
I don't want to go do the bins. I don't want to be a postman.
Yeah.
I don't want to do that. So then there was the push for second and third world immigration, which was obviously the Windrush generation, which was the most typified one.
Because we were so short of
they came
people.
over and basically filled these lower strata jobs.
Which allowed a sort of what you might call an unintentional not racism outright, but an unintentional kind of like look down upon people.
I think it was more sort of like an economic classism.
Yeah, that's I think that's what I'm trying to get at. An economic classism is like, well, I'm not doing the job of whatever. I'm above that. In the circumstance of that, I think, as much as, don't get me wrong, in that period there was a aspect of racial bigotry and prejudice, because obviously that immigration hadn't happened to that extent before, and it was new, and it was uncharted territory,
and there was a certain, like, I mean, it's human nature. It's like, obviously the unknown causes a lot of suspicion and hostility. But in terms of that situation, I think it was more economic forces that brought that along. And I think it's usually economic forces that cause a lot of the very cultural and interpersonal conflicts in society. Because, I mean, and I don't really want to lean too heavily into that, because someone might call me Marxist in that particular.
Anybody who knows you, John, would know that definitely those you and that word would never come together.
Yeah, hopefully not. But don't get me wrong, I appreciate what he was saying. I just disagree. But in terms of that situation, I think it's like the change of the economy in terms, and the avenues that economy could be enacted through, is one of the main motivating forces for that sort of like divergence of perspective between millennial and the baby boomer generation, because they came up through, I think the only thing, and I mean this might be a generalization heavily, but like we touched on earlier, the constant growth of economy and technology always going up. The only thing that was really sort of in turmoil was the civil aspect of society.
Yeah.
The social aspect of society.
I personally think is been used as a bit of a linchpin by, let's say, right-leaning politicians or right-leaning political movements, is that, hey, you know what was good about the 50s and 60s? It was the fact that you didn't see as many of these people of this color or these people of this persuasion, or rather, if they were behind closed doors. They were, spoken about in only hushed tones. And I think that's the false utopia sold to people in that way. Is you may disagree, but the false utopia sold to
I'm not going to disagree. I'm actually
people of a certain age is not because you had a job where, not because, say, you had a job where your wages were enough to live a very good life, and that those at the top were not earning 300 times what you are. They were only earning 30 times what you are. The taxation system was there. There was a good safety net for those who couldn't help but fall through the cracks. No, it's not about that. It's just that, those people over there were not there, and that's what will make it good if we just get rid of those people over there.
Yeah.
I'm not an argument for unsustained immigration or anything like that, but
I think we're running away with ourselves a little bit.
We are. When did I call? I probably called 5 minutes ago, 10 minutes ago.
Let me cap on that, because I was going to reaffirm what you were saying. For me personally, I'm not really someone that is caught up massively on you're a different color from me, you don't belong, I'm more for a realist approach to that aspect, the sort of cultural and the sort of like the cultural and confronting the cultural differences between people that may move into society, and that creates a very real and something that needs to be confronted, because a lot of cultures aren't really compatible with the beliefs of the Western world and the Western canon. I think I've touched on this.
Yeah.
But
Quite
it's really
secular, a secular, most, let's face it, mostly secular, semi-Christian sort of...
Christian descent, really. A lot of our moralism is still based on Christian premise, but that's kind of getting away from the thing I wanted to touch upon. And I do this a lot. I'm sorry, guys. But in terms of like the move away, I think it is the case that Boomer generation had that constant uptick. It was only the civil aspect that was sort of like, and the social aspect that was kind of in flux. We've gone into a generation where that kind of, 1990s, even around the like the dot-com boom, like the internet coming around and the dot-com boom, even with that massive innovation, it seemed like that era of like massive and unsustained and unstoppable economic growth kind of slaked off, and it slowly just petered down to a sort of status quo.
That's probably the last notable period of where, they said, oh, well, the mining and industrial jobs have gone, but hey, look, there's a dot-com boom because somebody literally knows how to put a website in. And it's funny, you were talking about a little bit back, I was remembering another article that was written. It was funny enough when Bernie Sanders went just after Trump got elected, and he went to the coal mining area of Virginia, who actually really like Bernie Sanders, and said the reason they didn't vote for Hillary Clinton and they voted for Trump instead because they didn't see that Bernie Sanders and Trump were offering something different to what Clinton was offering, which was same old, which is why they gave their vote to the diametric opposites, because they said both of you offered a change, but we didn't get the candidate on your side who was willing to even proffer that we needed change. And what they said is that it's not necessarily the jobs that they miss, but it's what it brought with them. It was the financial security. It was the job security. They don't miss breathing in coal dust, like, quite frankly. They don't miss that. Who would? And I know nobody would miss that. I think that there's the romanticism is around the fruits of the labor rather than the labor itself.
I think it's like we can go even further back and talk about the industrial revolutions, which there are actually two of them historically.
Shall we make that? Shall we make that? I'd like to research that. Shall we make that? Shall we make that next week's historical topic?
That could be something.
I can see you getting excited already, because I'm going to have to.
Let's have a revision of those eras and come back and compare notes. But I think generally, just to sort of like tie a bow on this sort of on this topic, I don't know if we've actually furrowed through every sort of like avenue that we're thinking of. There's a couple of things.
Continue this next week. We could go on. I'm happy. I'm not taking any orders. Neither of us is taking orders from directors here. There's no one breathing over our shoulder to make sure it's 22 minutes on the dot in the sitcom format. So I think we could easily.
Although sometimes I think I could use a manager in some
in
aspects.
Yeah, in life.
I just need a chaperone, really. I don't really know.
Get you focused on the millennial.
Maybe that's the solution for the millennial problem. We just need chaperones.
We need chaperones. Personal PAs. Every single one should be assigned a personal PA.
For the ladies, it just needs a guy to come along and go, you've been on your phone for 15 minutes. You need to actually do something.
You said you were going to come out. I've been in the car since 7. It's now 8:30. You said you'd be ready to go to the dinner at 7. I'm not sitting here any longer. Yeah. That's a whole.
And for the guys, it could just be like, get out the fucking house.
Will you get off that sofa? God damn it! I'll do it in a minute.
Off the internet and do something.
The bins will not empty themselves. So
maybe that's the contrast. Maybe it's just like you need someone that is a bit of this generation but can actually see the snags and the pitfalls that are affecting our generation, because we are very listless. We're very much, we don't know where we're going, so we just kind of float around.
I'm not gonna say that's not true. I'm certainly gonna say that there are, especially I know I could probably name 100 people that I've met personally that don't deserve anything, even though they're of my age, because they just can't be asked. So, and often want the same thing on a plate.
The thing is, like, I think ultimately you could say, I keep pushing this on. We've got to finish, but let me just touch on this. It's like one of the aspects that I dropped as a note in terms of like one of the things that was a flaw with the millennial generation was the entitlement, and a lot of that ties into the upbringing that we had with our parents. because I was just watching actually, I'll just get into it. If you're familiar with a guy called Simon Sinek, he dropped a video about millennials in the workplace. I can share this link to you.
I have a feeling I've seen that, and I can't think why. I don't know. Is that in the last year or so, last 6 months or something?
2016, actually, it was released October.
Yeah, no, I think I saw it at the time. I think, and I totally got it because I've worked with people who have been my age or older or younger, and you can sometimes tell that some of them you can go, right, that guy literally deserves a pay rise tomorrow. He is unbelievably hardworking. Like I worked with a guy who had like 3 kids. He was 23. He went straight from working a bouncer job in a horrible nightclub to literally coming straight into driving. And he said what he used to do is sleep 2 hours in his car and then like start the whole process over and over again every night, every day. And somehow he hadn't collapsed. I don't think he probably could have sustained that for much longer. But I said, if there's a guy who deserves to be given a much better shot in life, it's that guy. 23, he's got 3 kids. He's making sure they're all fed. He's making sure they're looked after. But at the same time, if you look 50 years or so back, one normal job would have surely been just about enough to get him through, and not a job that meant he had to do silly hours and he had to be, basically have no rest whatsoever, no respite. And that's the difference. So if he's just, if he's getting that done on 2 jobs, and I used to do 3 jobs, and I know that it can leave you almost dead, it can give you health problems, but you can't physically work, physically for 60 to 80, sometimes 90 for me hours a week for long term without.
You need rest time. You need rest time.
You do, and that's why I get angry at the certain jobs as well. You should just work harder and work longer, but it's still not actually creating a difference in my personal circumstances.
It's not like you're cresting a wave and you're going to smash into all this great stuff.
Yeah, I'm not going to fall like Scrooge McDuck into just like, if I just ride the wave enough, I'm going to fall into the Scrooge McDuck gold pile. And it's like, oh, well, he clearly worked for, well, no, what they usually do is they go, oh, well, you can work that long. Could you work a little bit longer because you're already doing it?
I've just had the thought, and it keys into something I said earlier. I think it's like, I'm doing a lot of this. I kind of wheel round back on what I say. But the change from manufacturing jobs where the product of your labor was something that was, you may have had a
tangible
production targets, but it was done when it was done. You can't rush a car. You could, if you've done a car because you imagine if they tried to apply that to today's marketplace in the UK, this is the reason why they automated.
Could you kick out another one before closing time?
Yeah, this is why they this is why they pushed for automation in car manufacture, because it works so much faster and it can kick out a car in much higher speeds. But in terms of the 50s, that mentality was very much, it's done when it's done. It's actually an artisanal product effectively. I mean, some of the cars back then were not only
well put together,
functional, but they were beautiful vehicles, and they were made with art.
And they were engineered to basically last. They weren't designed to be immensely throwaway things. And I think that's
some of the Chevrolets and like Buicks and stuff like that. They were effectively road-going boats. They
were average. Yeah, and Chevrolets and Fords and Plymouths. If you look at how big and fancy they were, and they were everyman cars, and every man drove a Plymouth and every man drove a Ford. If you were really, really posh, you drove. If you were sort of middle class, you had a Mercury or you had an Oldsmobile, or in the UK, you'd have like a Rover as opposed to a Morris or an Austin. And then if you were doing really well in America, you had if you were a dentist, you had a Buick. And then if you were head of the Dentistry Association, you had a Cadillac. But if you look at the size difference, they weren't really that, they were all the same form of ginormagantuan, to paraphrase American Jad. How big do you want him to be? Ginormagantuan. So but it's now, it's like, well, what have you made in your life? I've got the paperwork somewhere. I filed some things somewhere for some company.
This is the other side I was actually going to key on. We've gone from that where the product actually takes a period of time, and the demand, even if it's there, is kind of quantified by the process. The process being actually tangible, and it's very quantifiable. It's not actually a rush process. The demand and the actual process are not actually keyed together in terms of getting to the actual product itself. The services economy that we have now, where it's very much get it now. Yeah. It's kind of it's gone down to the point where there's no room for restraints. There's no room for actually quantifying a bit of space to actually to work.
How fast is too fast? Apparently not at all. There's no upper limit on how much should you be able to extract out of your employees. And this is obviously where the drive for automation is coming from, because demand has gotten to be so tyrannical, and I love that word, tyrannical. Big word.
That basically that the demand is so massive and so constant and so immediate that you need that the people that are working in these jobs, they have to push themselves to the absolute limit of themselves. And I think businesses are actually coming to the point of going, well, we're pushing them to the absolute limit. I don't think we can squeeze any more out of people, and we're
certainly not going to try and pay them more. We're certainly paying them more. That's for us, that's for the CEOs.
There's a lot of factors that go into basically sort of, we can't force them to do any more than that. We have to kind of make it very consensual, because obviously the human rights aspect and all that business, which is very inconvenient for business. And
there he is.
Yeah.
There's that firebrand.
Why do they bother? Why do they bother?
Human rights. That's not. I'm not affected by that.
Good. I'm not even human. No, I'm another level of humanity.
I'm above you. The jury's still out on my species.
Oh well, if you've seen Mark Zuckerberg or Jeff Bezos, you might.
Yeah, the jury's still out on what planet Elon Musk comes from exactly. And
South Africa.
So yes, the weird planet of the South Africa, and Mark Zuckerberg is basically Data's long lost brother, but the one obsessed with profit. So
yeah, he was formed more than birthed.
He was made of one of those mold things.
Yeah, but the thing is, it's very true. I think we'll cap this off now. But it's very true that there's a very strong divergence in terms of like the pressures and the circumstances and the actual the framing of the times, the context
of the baby boomer versus millennial.
And our time is very much a lot more. I mean, don't get me wrong.
Sort of wrapped up in unavoidable short-termism. Would you say?
We're very caught up in a short-term perspective, and everything is very immediate, and we're a lot more sort of. I'm trying to cap this off, and I don't have the words. But obviously, the baby boomers came through a generation after a conflict, and we're sort of living under a constant idea that tomorrow could be the end of the world, but it wasn't really something that was forced into their face. It existed
in the background, which we touched on in the episode. That existed in the background. It wasn't every single day. Your day is based around knowing how much closer we are to Armageddon.
Paradoxically, we don't really have that overarching sort of pressure to drive us forward. There's not really that, because there was sort of like a do or die thing with that generation of baby boomer that was basically like, well, it could go off tomorrow, so I better get in and make this thing happen. And especially in the 80s, that was kind of the mentality.
I've listened. Yeah, well, fun enough, I've got a chap who is a local chap who told me long term about being up listening to the radio in pubs during the Cuban Missile Crisis. Like being in a pub with a load of other people in their 20s and stuff, wondering like, is the world going to end tonight?
Is this going to go wrong?
Yeah, is this going to go wrong? And literally, like, if anyone who had a television set, people would just, people would be gathering in pubs anywhere where you could have a television set because it could go wrong. And then when it did go right, he said you couldn't move for people shagging each other because it was almost like it was like a reaction. It's like, we're gonna live another day. Come here, you know. And mutually.
Oh, sorry, Keith.
I'm sorry, Keith. Sorry, Keith.
You're looking very attractive. I mean, your hair was looking. Never mind, Keith. Sorry about that, Keith.
Sorry, it's just we live to fight another day, and yeah. So I think
and all the other conservatives around are kind of going bloody liberals.
Bloody liberals. Yeah. I sleep with I sleep with a wife who hates my guts. You know, don't you, Meredith? don't you, Mavis? Yeah. So we'll round it up on that. I think we've covered a lot of ground because we've gone on for a lot longer than expected, but I think we've done well. And we could easily,
as ever,
expand.
Tangential.
Yeah, tangential. Once again, if you're on YouTube or Facebook, comment or like up in the thing below. Tell your friends if they're interested. If you want to tell us that we got some salient points, please do. If you want to tell us that we're whiny millennials that should get on their bike and go look for a job in the second recession in 12 years. I just said if you're one of those people
if you want to move that boulder uphill only to have it roll back down.
And then get bigger as it does roll back.
Start the process all over again.
Yeah. But the boulder's grown in size by 3 times. And it's like, see, if one more person tells me this is a moment for opportunity, I'm just gonna punch all the self-help books in the world.
I'm just gonna lose my mind.
I'm gonna lose my rag. Anyway, I think it's about dinner time. So we
definitely have more to talk about on this, I think.
Oh, massively way more to talk about. So what I will say is, but for the time being, it's goodbye from me. And that's the bit where you say goodbye.
It's goodbye from me.
There we go. We got it in the end. We'll have it down like we'll have it down like the two line. You need a prompt, mate. You need a prompt.
It's like that's it, manager. I need a manager.
Read the prompt.
This is where you stop talking.
Yes, the guy prods you in the corner, read the prompt, moron. Anyway, we will see you shortly.
God, so send it, God.
Yeah. Goodbye.